all patients with rare diseases in India. So advised by Dr. I.C. Verma and many other eminent scientists and philanthropists, we came together and started this. I am also affiliated at the George Mason University, and here are some of my disclosures. Dell has sponsored my travel here, and I do consulting work and serve on the board of a number of for-profit and non-profits. So, with that background, what I want to do is, I think, from looking at the agenda, I thought this was going to be the first talk on policy issues for the day, but the challenge following such an eminent lineup of speakers is to say something that has not already been said. But I think there is still room here. So I think there is a lot of confusion among the community on the difference between Orphan Drug Act and Rare Disease Policy. So I'll make a small attempt here. I'm by no means an expert in policy. Like I said, I'm a bioinformatician by training, but somebody had to do this job of bringing out the details. So we all talk about ODA, but what is in this Orphan Drug Act really? And what lessons can India borrow from this? Because this is a 33-year-old act, and very little has changed in this act. That's the beauty. And when this act was enacted, there was not even a definition for what a rare disease is in any country. So today there are 269 definitions, but when this act came up, there was not a single definition. And even today, whatever the ad hoc definition they adopted is still holds good. So I'll talk about the impact that the Orphan Drug Act has had on the industry and patients all around the world so far, led by the United States, and elements of what a rare disease policy needs to encapsulate, and try to draw the distinction between ODA and a rare disease policy. I think much has said about the status of rare disease in India, but I will try to give my, put it in my own language. And finally, I am all about action. So we want to make sure there is some action at the end of the day. So I'll put some recommendations on behalf of my team from ORDI. So a good thing is that all of us have noticed in the last 3 years, suddenly there is a lot of activity, a lot of talk online on the internet. So 3 years ago when I did an online search, there was hardly 2 or 3 organizations that were talking about rare diseases. Today I think social media, press releases, newspaper, all over, we have a lot of talk and discussion on the rare disease topic, which was one of the objectives of starting the Organization for Rare Disease. As of when we started, there was not a national policy or even a recognition that rare disease as a field deserves any attention at all, nor at the state level. Although there have been some pilot programs for newborn screening in Goa and a couple of states. So I'll skip through some of the redundant stuff on the slides. So one point is that the science and investment environment overall, even today, discourages investment in biopharma research and development because of the economic equations. So in India in particular, it's primarily driven by biosimilars. So how does an Orphan Drug Act, which is primarily giving tax incentives and other incentives to companies investing in R&D, apply in the Indian ecosystem? So that's something we will look at as well. So what is Orphan Drug Act and why it is coming to history? So this was also part of the Cosmetic and the Drug Act of the United States. And these were some of the reasons that the Act stated why this was being done. So many diseases, they stated a few very bothering diseases like Huntington's, ALS, Tourette syndrome, and muscular dystrophy. None of them, so there was no formal definition of a rare disease then. So just to make sure that these diseases are included in the category, they just came up with the number 1 in 200,000. So less than 200,000 patients in the United States should be affected by a disease to be called as rare disease. And still, even today, same definition holds after 33 years. Adequate orphan drugs have not been developed, and this is in 1983, so not today. So because so few individuals are affected, there is no reasonable expectation that any profit can be made from investing in a drug development. And hence a financial loss would be incurred if government took no action. So there is a reason to believe that some promising orphan drugs will not be developed unless some change and action has been taken by the government. And also there was a general understanding that and acknowledgement that it's in the public interest to provide such changes and incentives to encourage the development of orphan products. So for those reasons, the law was enacted, and here are the highlights of this. So the recommendations very specifically says that the health secretary is required to provide written recommendations to an orphan drug sponsor on the non-clinical and clinical investigations necessary for the approval of such a drug. Right? The secretary by regulation will be required to promulgate the procedures to the sponsor for non-clinical and clinical investigations. So the designation of drugs as orphan. So there are two aspects to it. One is designating a potential drug, a candidate drug as orphan, and the second is actually approving it as an orphan drug. Those are two stages of the process. So, and that is done through a written correspondence through the health secretary. So a disease or condition with no reasonable expectation of making any profits will recover through sales in the country. Right? So, and then protection for patented or unpatented drugs for rare diseases. So this is one of the challenges for India because the patent laws are so poor or poorly enforced. What this ODA does is that it provides 7 years of market exclusivity. So the health secretary will not, or the DCGI will not approve any other drug or give the designation of orphan to any other company if once a product has already got the designation. So even without a patent. So that protects the company's investment in the product unless there is a new product which comes with significant clinical efficacy. So open protocols for investigations of orphan drugs would also be made available. So the Orphan Drug Act also instated that appointed by the Health Secretary, a board would be set up that would be comprised of the Assistant Secretary of Health of the Department of Health and Human Services, who would serve as the chair of the board, and representatives from the Food and Drug Administration, the National Institutes of Health, Center for Disease Control, and any other relevant government agency would be represented on this board. The Orphan Products Board will promote the sponsors, research and development activities of this and provide an annual report of what progress has been made or lack thereof. So very specific responsibilities were laid out when it was enacted. And I think a representative from Genzyme clearly pointed out that if there is no financial incentive, a for-profit company would not invest in this, and it's a 5 to 7 year time frame and horizon. So this Orphan Drug Act specifically provides for 50% of the cost incurred in clinical testing of orphan designated drugs, there would be tax credit provided by the government. So there is an interplay between the health department and the tax department here. The research expenses, R&D expenses involved in coming up with these orphan drugs would also be tax exempted. Limitations based on tax amount and those other clauses would be automatically included through the respective agencies. So also there would be waiver of drug application fee or user fees, which are typical for most other drugs. And there would be an expedited review by the Food and Drug Administration for all orphan drug products applications. So in addition to these, there are a couple other elements. One is the home health services, which is probably going to be a lot more relevant to India because about 70% of our population is rural. So there is a lot of care not readily available in the backyard, so they rely on home health services. So reimbursements and training provided to caregivers in the family, it was also made part of the Orphan Drug Act. Grants and contracts for clinical trials and research for orphan products and development was also part of this. So this covers all the elements, at least briefly, that were included in this Orphan Drug Act, which was a beautiful act, and a lot of reports have come out on the impact of Orphan Drug Act. So this chart summarizes the overall sentiment on the positive impact that Orphan Drug Act has had so far. So even though it came up in the United States and 10 years down the road, European Union, Japan, and other countries have followed suit, it's still a handful of countries that have an Orphan Drug Act. But it has benefited the world over. So if you see a few years after the Orphan Drug Act was enacted, the industry growth trend graph line that you see, and the number of new designations and market approvals. So by 2000, 200 new drugs were already approved, orphan drugs. And as of now, I think more than 450 orphan drugs have been approved. And over 2,900 orphan designations, as you can see from here. So the Orphan Drug Act's incentives and the Office of Orphan Products Development's clinical superiority criteria motivate drug companies to develop orphan products. And I think this was already mentioned, over a third of all products that are approved by FDA in the last 5 years are orphan products. So this is driven not just by rare diseases. So I'll come shortly to the definition of rare disease, but one point that was not noted today, probably all of you are already aware of, is what is happening with precision medicine, right? So cancer is not a single common disease. Although cancer is common, cancer is a set of several rare diseases. So if you look at small cell lung cancer, it's a very rare form of cancer. So, but if you look at overall cancer, there's more than 200 types now. And that number of stratification. So the other phrase for precision medicine is also stratified medicine. So when you stratify cancer into several molecularly, almost any cancer can be classified as a rare cancer. So at the end of the day, we have a genome of 3 billion bases, and all of us are unique and rare in our own ways. So I think the overall trend in precision medicine is the era of common diseases, blockbuster drugs is a game of the past. More and more companies are filing for orphan designations and getting orphan approvals, and then pursuing off-label use of those drugs later. So I think that was a question for DCGI also. Off-label use is a phrase commonly used in US. So the other impact is that advocates report that orphan products are usually accessible to patients. So, and this is all in the US, right? So this is going to be a challenge for us in India. How can we make these drugs accessible to patients all over India, particularly rural parts of India? I think the urban crowd is extremely aware, and they can access and afford a lot of these drugs, but I think 70% of the population is still rural. How are we going to make it accessible there? The Office of Orphan Products Development provides a valuable service to both the companies and patients. So I think those are the two key stakeholders here: the companies that are investing in orphan product development and the patients that are waiting for these products to come out. And if they both are finding incentives, then we are covered. Orphan products meet the legal prevalence limit, and most fall well below the threshold of 200,000 patients. So this is a very critical point here, because in India, and even in the United States, this definition of whole rare disease is purely based on prevalence, nothing else, right? I mean, it's not based on the characteristics of the disease itself. It has nothing to do with the molecular makeup, the pathology, or any aspect of the disease. It's purely based on prevalence. And for a country where none of the prevalence data is available, there is no patient registry, there is no census data, no statistics on any of the prevalence, how does it matter what number we fix? Then how will the government justify that yes, there is this is less than 1 in 5,000 or 10,000? We have to just make up based on a handful of data points that the experts today shared with us. We just have to make up through extrapolation, which would be a very wild extrapolation, right? So that's a point to note as well. So those were the aspects and impact that the Orphan Drug Act has had so far. Now, coming to rare disease policy, I think this is where, so Orphan Drug Act is all about company and patients, getting drugs approved, incentivizing the research and development for new therapies and drugs. Rare disease policy is about diagnosis, providing incentives to the patients for healthcare delivery, gaining access, and being able to afford these drugs. So how can we set up the government play a role in facilitating, say the newborn screening has been referenced. So newborn screening would not be part of the Orphan Drug Act, right? So that would not come under the DCGI purview. But it is part of the state level health policies where we can, each state can have their own recommendation on what diseases to screen for in all newborns. So in the United States, in 2006, this paper from ACMG initiated a uniform screening program, a panel of about 52 diseases, and over a period of last 10 years, only a handful of diseases have been added, and the last disease to be added to this is Pompe. And we have the founder of Pompe Foundation here, and he tells me that there is only 25 Pompe patients in all of India. So it's an ultra rare disease. Even in the United States, there's a handful of people with this disease. And this has been added to the newborn screening program in the US as the latest addition. The Secretary has just approved it. So I think there are 58 diseases which have been identified by ACMG as good candidates, which are treatable, which are diagnosable, which we understand to a great degree. So that's a very good starting point for us. So I have a link and a PDF file with all the list and all the treatments available as well. So that's about newborn. So diagnosis and treatment options. I think there's India is now developing a lot of both commercial and academic non-profit laboratory capability to diagnose diseases, but that still remains a big challenge. I think Dr. Girish and others were mentioning today that diagnosis is extremely underemphasized. So unless we know a patient has Pompe disease, we don't know what to do with the patient, even if the treatment is available. So getting to the diagnosis quickly is a very important aspect. And those things can be made part of rare disease policy. And if a newborn screening can identify these inherited diseases at birth, that will help the entire planning for the whole family, both from an economic standpoint and from a clinical planning standpoint. So, and health remains a state level issue, I think, in most countries, including India. So there needs to be a state level budget on how to implement newborn screening and providing research grants and so forth for this. Diagnosis and treatment delivery through private and government healthcare in India. So the government hospitals do provide free treatment for a lot of patients with a lot of diseases, but not for the more expensive chronic rare diseases. So why not? So the Delhi High Court that was referenced earlier is an example. So the court is, the judicial system is very much supportive of government providing those treatments free of cost to the patients. So that's where we founded this Organization for Rare Diseases India. We started off with a review article bringing together a lot of people in the crowd today, including Dr. I.C. Verma and Dr. Girish Katta and others, to review I think this is probably the only review, Dr. Katoch, probably you ran into when you saw this was published in 2014. And we attempted to define a rare disease by prevalence here, looking at the numbers from US, EU, Australia, and other countries. I think most of those numbers account to somewhere between 1 in 1,000 to 1 in 2,500 or so. So if you look at this, I just stole this slide from Dr. I.C. Verma's presentation, which I could find online. So if we can, I think, as a group, agree where this cutoff should be. If we want to include Duchenne muscular dystrophy as a rare disease and be part of the policy, and if it is only, say, 1 in 5,000, then we definitely want to make sure there. So, whether it is congenital hypothyroidism, where do we want to set this cutoff? I think it can be arbitrary, and for US Orphan Drug Act, it was done arbitrarily, and they used best judgment from expert inputs. So, and there has been no need to change that definition even after 33 years. So I think the experts here could come up with a number based on the prevalence data that we have so far, and we could all agree on that. So to summarize, the applicability of ODA and rare disease policy to Indian situation, majority of these other countries that seem to have a good framework and a lot of progress in rare diseases have a 30% rural population and 70% urban population, whereas India and probably China also fall in this category, where we have a 70% rural population and 30% urban, which means infrastructure is very much underdeveloped in rural areas. Access to hospitals and latest technologies like next-gen sequencing are not nearby, so they have to either travel long distance or are not even aware of these sources. Lack of awareness, I think this has been beaten to death today, and rightly so. So, at Organization for Rare Diseases India, we have taken two major initiatives, which I will talk about in the next couple of slides, where I think awareness, mass awareness at the public level and also at the physician level is being worked on. So I think we reference this, the Medical Council of India article also in our review, that genetics and molecular biology has been added to the MBBS curriculum since 2012. But the number of medical genetics departments across the country are woefully inadequate even now.
Okay.
Lack of infrastructure, again, going back to the rural-urban split. Prohibitive cost of diagnostic odyssey and treatment is going to be a challenge, so how are we going to address that? Cultural practices such as consanguinity and other cultural issues specific to India. Right now there is no government policy, but it's very encouraging based on the discussion today that we can hopefully see the light at the end of the tunnel sooner rather than later. And bottom line is always the funding. I think that also has been referenced. So I think with funding, there will be more students, doctors, researchers, companies willing to invest their time or money in product development, research, and so forth. So I think creating a pool for funding rare disease research is going to be critical. So we formed ORDI with the goal of representing the collective voice of all rare disease patients. So I think there's several organizations for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. There have been several organizations for lysosomal storage, Pompe, and other diseases. But we need to form a united coalition where we represent the collective voice of all patients with rare diseases in India. So with that vision, that's one of the goals, is to make all rare diseases as easily diagnosable and treatable as common diseases in India. There's also compassionate use programs that we mentioned are made available through Genzyme, Shire, and other companies that we want to expand and scale up as well. So for rare disease research, the Institute of Medicine came up with the following national strategy 7-point strategy for US. I think most of it is applicable for us as well, is active involvement and collaboration of all stakeholders. I think it was recognized and acknowledged by some of the leaders today that individually there are a lot of experts, but when it comes to team science and working together as a team, the collaboration is not happening as much between basic researchers, medical researchers, engaging patients and other stakeholders. So I think making more of the team and collaborative effort is one key agenda. Timely application of advances in science and technology towards the R&D. Appropriate use and development of trial design and analytical methods. Strategies for data sharing. So I think sharing resources, sharing all this data, I think everybody is sitting on a gold mine of data which can be really mined when it can all be integrated. So I think Dr. Bhattacharya mentioned that when there was a proposal put out for big data, 0 proposals came in. So I think big data is where all the value is, in the sense of bringing together, if you want a national registry, all these medical genetics facilities need to be sharing data with a centralized, neutral repository, which is a two-way traffic. Everybody wins in that. Reasonable incentives for private sector innovation and prudent use of public resources. Adequate resources including staff with expertise on rare diseases for public agencies that fund biomedical research. Mechanisms for weighing priorities for R&D and establishing collaborative as well as organization-specific goals and assessing progress towards these goals. So I think setting these quantitative metrics and following through on them is going to be critical. So one of the key paradigm shifts that's occurring, and I hear a lot in the United States by Dr. Francis Collins, or whether it is Eric Topol from Scripps and other pioneering doctors, is the concept of P4 medicine. I think the next-gen sequencing technology, the genomic revolution, all that is giving us this tool for preventive medicine. So India, the general cultural attitude is reactive. Only when there is a problem we will solve it, as opposed to preventing the problem from occurring in the first place. So I think that's a general problem everywhere. So if we need to embrace the preventive, predictive, participatory and personalized. So all 4 aspects. So I would underline participatory here, because that's where the patient participation comes into picture. We are all working for the patient, and without active engagement and involvement of the patient in this process, nobody is going to win. So what will make this very easy for us is the smartphone revolution that is already anyway occurring. Even in the rural parts of India, everybody has a smartphone these days. So just by making it easy with the push of a button, if patients can submit data on a daily basis or whenever it's necessary, gathering that data and setting up an infrastructure that can support it would make that participatory medicine, of course, awareness and informed consent and all these other aspects as well. But I think we are well poised in time. So I would say, being part of Dell Life Science Solution, technology is not a limiting factor for the types of problems that we are all discussing to solve here. I think having a practical plan and will of the key decision makers and funding are limiting factors. So here is a summary of my recommendations. So I think we need to act. That's very clear, because we are 33 years behind the rest of the world. A lot of progress is occurring. There is an international consortium for rare diseases, and we from ORDI tried to participate in that, and we were not even allowed to be part of it, because only countries with the commitment of at least 10 million in rare disease research fund are allowed to be part of members of this consortium. So country with 1.3 billion people, we should be able have an overall commitment or pledge of at least $10 million in a year. So I think there is none right now that I know of. So I think if we can at least have a entity or task force that can say, from each state, this is the number of grant funds that were spent on rare disease research this year, then that's a good start. And if that number exceeds 10 million, then we have a seat at the table in the international consortium. So I think we should implement newborn screening. Most doctors I have spoken with, in fact, every single doctor here feels that it's a no-brainer that we should have newborn screening. Where there may be slight disagreements is what is the starting list that we should screen for, and that's always negotiable. Even if we start with congenital hypothyroidism as a single disease, we can always add new diseases to the program later. But starting somewhere, so maybe we can have 3 disease mandatory newborn screening and 58 disease optional screening for those who are willing to pay for all the diseases, but at least have a mandatory screening for a couple diseases for every child that is born. And we also need to have a program for granting research in clinical and for orphan drug products. Drive affordability and adoption of validated new technologies. So I think that's also been discussed quite a bit today. So with the Organization for Rare Diseases India, here is a small selection of international collaborations that we have ongoing. One is through my affiliation with George Mason University. We have established a Center for Chronic Metabolic and Rare Diseases that I co-direct with Dr. Baranova. And Dr. Jimmy Lin is a very good friend of mine, and he's also a founder of the Rare Genomics Institute, which provides a crowdfunding mechanism to help patients with undiagnosed diseases or conditions to sequence the exomes of the entire family, and raising money for that through crowdsourcing. And he has actually authored a excellent book, a 159-page book on the best practices guidelines for diagnosing rare diseases, which is available in a PDF format. So if you are interested, please email us and we will be happy to share that with you. So the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health is another collaboration where we are a member and we participate in their data sharing working groups and so forth. So I mentioned about this global initiative IRD-IRC, which is also set a very ambitious but yet I would say practical goal of by 2020 there should be 200 new orphan therapies and be able to diagnose all known rare diseases by 2020. So I think it will be great to have India be a part of such a ambitious global effort. So 2 major programs that I will mention today. One is Rare Disease Care Coordination Center. This came out of Prasanna Shirol's thoughts and ideas and discussion with various doctors, is that we would create, and this is now sponsored by Quintiles. It's a hub and spoke model. The Organization for Rare Diseases India, with our offices in Bangalore, we serve as a data collection and coordination site. There are several multi-specialty hospitals that are advising us and working with us, including Manipal Kasturba Medical College and MS Ramaya Hospital in Bangalore has generously offered us the facilities and space there at no cost. And we are looking to expand this program. There is funding and we are actually looking to hire the coordinators for this program. So please contact us or let anybody that you know who might be interested in helping be part of this expansion process. So Dr. Bhattacharya asked me to also provide a status update on the Karnataka rare disease policy. So I think this is coming together well, and but although slowly. I think the Vision Group of Biotechnology in Karnataka is the best position to provide the latest update. But they have engaged with a number of prominent organizations, and ORDI has been engaged with them. We provided a draft policy from our side as well. This model of the Vision Group is appointed by the government, which includes Dr. Kiran Mazumdar Shah, Dr. Vijay Chandru, and others. So this group appointed by the government and who unites and brings together all the relevant organizations and stakeholders represents a good model to engaging with the government. We need an intermediary who can serve as a coalition or a uniting force to represent to the government. So this is the other major initiative. I hope most of you have heard about Race for 7. Sangeeta Barre is here. She's one of the co-founders. She developed her organization generously, provides all the branding and support for all our activities, and all this amazing logo and brand for Race for 7 was all developed by her. And led by Prasanna also. So this year on International Rare Disease Day, every year, last Sunday of February, we plan to celebrate Race for 7. And this year there were more than 3,000 people who ran. This was the first year, and these are all our sponsors, so we like to thank them all. And we had first year debut with 3,000 people. Next year we are looking to have a group run in Delhi and Mumbai and Calcutta. So we like to expand this to all metro areas. So we really like to collaborate with any of you who would be willing to take a lead in just flagging off all runners. So we will have all the central coordination, website and registrations, all that is streamlined. We were able to raise, I think, 25 lakhs, more than 25 lakh rupees through this campaign, and we raised a lot of awareness. It was a buzz all over in the social media. All major newspapers covered this. So through this, we can spread awareness about all rare diseases in India. So this is our team. I think you have seen several of us today here. So if you have a sick child, it's not a rare disease, but it's the only disease that matters. And Prasanna reminds me and several of us every single day, because he is the father of a 16-year-old child with Pompe disease. And for the last 9 years, his struggle has been a very inspiring story for not only us, but I think a lot of people in India. So I will skip this. I think we are running out of time. So I'd like to thank the organizing committee, Dr. Bhattacharya and the whole team, all our ORDI colleagues and the advisory board members, the George Mason University crowd. So I have a few students' pictures there, and Dr. Baranova, who is co-director of the center, and all our partners and sponsors. So I do seek advice from time to time from Dr. Stephen Groft and Dr. Rashmi Gopal Srivastava at the National Institutes of Health Office of Rare Disease Research. What Dr. Groft just retired last year.